The mansion was silent, but the girl's heart seemed even quieter. "She just needs time," the expert said, as the parents got lost in reports and promises. It was only when a simple woman offered a paper bird that the first sound escaped from the child's throat, and in that gesture, small and immense, the beginning of a voice that the world had almost forgotten was born. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now on with the story. New York City was waking up that September morning with its usual frantic rhythm, but inside one of the most imposing mansions on the Upper East Side, time seemed to have stopped almost 2 years ago. Sophia was 5 years old and lived surrounded by everything money could buy. A bedroom the size of a whole apartment, imported toys that arrived in sealed boxes as if they were works of art, a team of people dedicated exclusively to her well-being. But none of it mattered, because Sophia didn't speak. She made no sounds, didn't respond when called by name, didn't cry or laugh. It was as if the little girl had decided to lock herself away and had thrown the key somewhere no one could reach. Edward, her father, was one of those men everyone knew by name. The owner of a corporate empire that spanned from real estate development to tech, he had a reputation for turning ideas into fortunes, with an ease that bordered on the supernatural. In the office, his mere presence was enough to make seasoned executives nervous. In meetings, his word was law. But inside that enormous house, facing the daughter who ignored him as if he were invisible, Edward felt completely powerless. He tried everything. He offered new toys every day, promised trips to anywhere in the world, sat beside her in the garden trying to start conversations that died in the air. Nothing. Sophia remained in her silent world, and each passing day was like a new defeat for a man accustomed only to winning. Patricia, her mother, had a routine that had become as predictable as it was painful. She would wake up early, check if Sophia was okay, prepare the breakfast the girl barely touched, and then dive into her private collection of frustrated hopes. A thick binder filled with medical reports, test results, and evaluations from expensive specialists who flew in from other cities or even other countries. Renowned neurologists, speech therapists with impressive resumes, child psychiatrists who charged astronomical hourly rates, they had all passed through Sophia's life, and all of them, invariably, left with the same bewildered expression. The tests never showed anything wrong. Her hearing was perfect. Her cognitive development was within the expected range. There was no identifiable physical trauma, no brain injury, no clear medical explanation for the silence that stretched like a shadow over the entire family. Meals in the house were especially difficult. The dining table could comfortably seat 12, but only 3 sat there: Edward, Patricia, and Sophia. The girl would sit at the end, poking at her food with a fork, staring at her plate, as if she was seeing something no one else could. Her parents tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, talking about their day, making comments about the food, but their voices sounded fake, even to themselves. It was like trying to pretend everything was fine while the house was on fire around them. And the worst part was Sophia's silence, which weighed more heavily than any scream ever could. In the garden, where there was a private playground with every piece of equipment a child could desire, Sophia spent hours sitting on the grass. She didn't play. She just watched the leaves move with the wind, or followed the flight of birds with her eyes. Patricia would sometimes stand at her bedroom window watching her daughter, and she felt her heart break a little more with each passing minute. Because that wasn't the tranquility of a content child, it was the apathy of someone who had given up trying to communicate with the turtle. It was on a rainy Tuesday that Dr. Henry Taylor arrived at the house. He was the kind of doctor who inspired confidence just by looking at him. Perfectly combed graying hair, discreet glasses, measured gestures, and a deep voice that made every word seem important. His reputation preceded him. They said he had solved cases that other doctors considered impossible. Edward and Patricia received him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. They had heard promises before. They had believed in miracles that never materialized. Dr. Taylor spent 3 hours with Sophia. He reviewed all the previous tests, asked the girl to make a few movements, tested her reflexes, and checked her hearing with equipment he had brought himself. Sophia cooperated mechanically, doing what was asked without showing any emotion. It was as if she were following a boring but necessary protocol. When he finished, the doctor asked to speak with the parents in private. In the library, surrounded by books no one read anymore, Dr. Taylor took off his glasses and carefully cleaned the lenses before speaking. Edward and Patricia were sitting on the sofa, their bodies tense, hands clasped, prepared for another complicated diagnosis or another battery of expensive tests. But what the doctor said was even more disconcerting. Physically, Sophia was perfect. Every organ functioned as it should. Her hearing was even better than average. There was no detectable neurological problem. She wasn't autistic, nor did she have any developmental disorder identifiable by traditional medical standards. Her silence didn't come from a physical inability to speak. It came from a much deeper and, ironically, much harder place to reach. It came from her emotions. Something was holding Sophia back from the inside, some emotional knot she couldn't untie on her own. And, according to Dr. Taylor, it wasn't a matter of more tests or new medications. It was a matter of understanding what this child was feeling and why she had chosen silence as her only way of existing. He said he had seen similar cases a few times in his career, and that almost always the solution came not from rigid medical protocols, but from a more human, more sensitive approach, one more connected to the child's real world. That's when he mentioned Dr. Helen Miller. She wasn't the kind of professional Edward and Patricia were used to consulting. She didn't have a luxurious office on Park Avenue, didn't charge astronomical fees per session, and wasn't famous in New York's high society circles. Helen worked with sensory and emotional therapy, using methods that many traditional doctors considered unorthodox: music, art, contact with nature, real-life everyday experiences. She believed that some children shut down because they lived in emotionally sterile environments where everything was controlled, scheduled, and protected to the extreme, and that the cure in these cases came not from more control but from less. Patricia was the first to accept the idea, not because she necessarily believed it would work, but because she was desperate. She no longer knew what to do, no longer had the strength to continue the endless search for answers that never came. If there was a chance, however small, she was willing to take it. Edward resisted more. He was a man of concrete results, of proven methods, of numbers and statistics. The idea of entrusting his daughter to someone who worked with music and drawing instead of medication and traditional therapies seemed too risky. But deep down, in that place he didn't like to look, Edward knew that perhaps part of the problem was precisely the way they lived, always trying to control everything, always protecting Sophia from any discomfort, always ensuring she had the best of everything, but never stopping to ask if she really needed all of it. Dr. Miller arrived on a Thursday afternoon. She didn't come in an imported car, didn't carry an Italian leather briefcase, didn't wear designer clothes. She arrived in a taxi with a colorful fabric bag slung over her shoulder, her hair in a simple bun, and a smile that judged no one. Patricia greeted her at the door with some apprehension. Helen was so different from all the other professionals who had come through there. She didn't ask about Sophia's medical history, didn't ask to see the test results, didn't want to know details about the girl's development. She simply asked, "Where does Sophia usually like to be?" They went to the garden. Sophia was in her usual spot, sitting on the grass, staring at nothing. Helen didn't introduce herself, didn't try to get the girl's attention abruptly. She simply sat on the ground a few feet away, opened her bag, and took out a small handmade bamboo flute. And she began to play. It was a simple, gentle, unhurried melody. It wasn't classical music or a well-known children's song. It was just sound flowing naturally, filling the space without invading it. Patricia watched from a distance, her heart tight. And then something happened that she hadn't seen in so long. She had almost forgotten what it was like. Sophia turned her head. It wasn't a sudden movement. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a child hearing a sound that interested her and turning to see where it came from. But for Patricia, that gesture was worth more than all the medical reports stored in her binder, because it was life. It was a reaction. It was Sophia saying without words that someone was still in there listening. Helen continued playing for a few minutes, then put the flute away and took out some colored chalk. She started drawing on the ground next to where she was sitting. Simple drawings: a house, a tree, a sun. Sophia watched. Helen then pushed the chalk toward the girl, not as a challenge or an order, but as an invitation, and Sophia, after long seconds of hesitation, picked up a yellow piece of chalk. She didn't draw anything yet, just held the chalk, feeling its texture, its bright color against the palm of her hand. The session lasted less than an hour. Helen said a simple goodbye, promising to return the next day. Patricia wanted to know what she thought, what diagnoses she had made, what treatment plan she would propose. But Helen just smiled and said it was too early for conclusions, that she needed to get to know Sophia better, to understand her world before trying to change it. And that, for now, the most important thing was that the girl had shown interest in something. She had turned. Her head, she had picked up the chalk. They were small steps, but they were steps. Helen's visits became daily, and gradually a different routine was established. She didn't follow a rigid schedule, didn't have a list of exercises to complete. Every day was different. Sometimes she brought simple musical instruments, other times modeling clay. One afternoon, she brought seeds and taught Sophia how to plant them in a window box. The girl still wasn't talking, but she was starting to interact. She would imitate Helen's gestures, pick up the objects that were offered, and even managed something like a smile when she made a perfect little ball of clay. And then the drawings began. Whenever Helen gave Sophia paper and crayons, the girl drew the same thing. Every single time. It was a simple, almost primitive drawing. A small house, a human figure next to it, a gate. She drew with an almost obsessive intensity, repeating the same lines, the same composition. Helen watched this with growing attention. It wasn't a random scribble. It was coded communication. Sophia was trying to say something through those drawings, but no one had cracked the code yet. On a bright, sunny afternoon, while Sophia was drawing her little house for the 10th or 15th time, something unexpected happened. The girl stopped drawing abruptly, lifted her head, and stared intently beyond the high wall that surrounded the garden. From the other side came the sound of children playing. There was a public school nearby, and it was recess. Loud laughter, shouts from a game, that typical joyful chaos of free-spirited childhood. Sophia stood up and walked to the wall. She couldn't see over it, but she stood there listening. And then she did something that put Helen on high alert. She pointed outside, toward the sound of the children, and then pointed to herself. Helen understood before Patricia, who was watching the scene from the porch. This child didn't want more expensive or sophisticated toys. She didn't need more therapy sessions inside that perfect, isolated garden. Sophia wanted people. She wanted real noise, real life, real connection. She was living in a gilded cage, and her silence was, perhaps, the only way she had found to protest against that elegant but suffocating isolation. That night, Helen spoke at length with Edward and Patricia. She was direct but kind. She said that Sophia wouldn't get better as long as she continued to live in that artificial world, where everything was controlled and predictable, that the girl needed to experience real life, with all its unpredictability, its noises, its imperfections. She needed to be around other children, ordinary people, situations that weren't scheduled and supervised 24 hours a day. Helen suggested something that sounded almost like heresy to the couple. Take Sophia to a public park on the weekend, without security guards, without a driver waiting in an expensive car, without creating a protective bubble around her. Just go like any normal family, and let the girl experience the world. Edward and Patricia spent a sleepless night discussing it. He thought it was too dangerous, irresponsible to expose their daughter like that. What if something happened? What if Sophia got even more scared and got worse? Patricia had the same fears, but she also had a growing certainty. Things couldn't go on like this. They had tried everything within the limits they were comfortable with, and nothing had worked. Maybe it was time to risk discomfort. Maybe it was time to trust that the love they felt for their daughter was strong enough to protect her even outside the glass dome they had built around her. The following Saturday they went. Edward drove his own car, something he hadn't done in years. Patricia sat in the back with Sophia, holding her daughter's small hand tightly, as if that could keep her safe. They went to Central Park in the mid-morning when it was already crowded. Children running, families having picnics, street vendors, cyclists, skateboarders, that chaotic and vibrant mix that is the hallmark of New York on a weekend. When they got out of the car, and Sophia's feet touched the pavement of the parking lot, something in her face changed. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't obvious, but Patricia, who knew her daughter's every expression, noticed. Sophia's eyes were more alive. She looked around with a different intensity, as if she were waking up from a very long sleep. The noise, which to Edward and Patricia seemed deafening after the controlled silence of their mansion, sounded like music to Sophia. Laughter erupting without warning, overlapping conversations, music from a boombox, vendors' calls, all of it coming together to form an imperfect urban symphony that the girl absorbed as if she were thirsty. They walked slowly along the park's paths. Sophia didn't run to the playgrounds, didn't ask to ride a bike, didn't show interest in the food carts. She watched people. She would stand still, watching other children play, couples holding hands, groups of friends laughing loudly, old men playing dominoes under the trees. It was as if she was studying a foreign language that had always existed, but that no one had ever bothered to teach her. And it was as they passed a bench near the lake that they saw the woman. She was pushing an old shopping cart, but it was filled with recyclables, plastic bottles, aluminum cans, crushed cardboard. She wore simple clothes, mended in some places, but clean. She had white hair tied in a low bun, skin weathered by the sun and time, and calloused hands from hard work. And she was singing, softly, almost to herself, a melody that Patricia didn't recognize, but that had something comforting about it, something familiar in the deepest sense of the word. Sophia stopped walking. She stared at the woman with an intensity that frightened Patricia. And then, for the first time in almost 2 years, for the first time since she had plunged into that inexplicable silence, Sophia took a voluntary step toward another person. She let go of her mother's hand and walked slowly toward the woman with the cart. Edward made a move to stop her, to prevent his daughter from approaching a stranger, but Patricia touched his arm, signaling for him to be quiet. She didn't know why, but she was sure they needed to let this happen. The woman noticed Sophia's presence and stopped pushing the cart. She turned and looked at the girl with eyes that had seen much of life, but still held a tenderness. She didn't say anything immediately, didn't ask questions. She just smiled, a genuine and simple smile. And then, without asking permission but also without being invasive, the woman knelt down to Sophia's level and took something out of a bag she was carrying in the cart. It was an origami bird, made from recycled paper and colored with markers. The folds were perfect, careful. You could see that this bird had been made with time and care, not in a hurry. The woman held out the origami bird to Sophia. The girl looked at the paper bird as if she were seeing the most precious thing in the world. She, who had a room full of expensive imported toys, who received pricey gifts every day and completely ignored them, reached out a trembling hand to take that little bird made of old paper. And when her fingers touched the origami, something inside her broke, or maybe something was mended. It was impossible to say. But Sophia hugged that bird to her chest and looked at the woman with an expression Patricia had never seen on her daughter's face. It was pure gratitude. It was connection. It was the recognition that finally, after so long, someone had understood exactly what she needed. The woman smiled again. In that way, only someone who has lived a long time and learned to find beauty in small things can smile. She lightly touched the top of Sophia's head, a quick, delicate gesture, almost a blessing. Then she took her cart and started to walk away, humming the same melody as before. And that's when something no one expected happened. Sophia, who hadn't reacted to much of anything for almost 2 years, panicked. It wasn't the tantrum of a spoiled child who doesn't get what she wants. It was genuine, visceral desperation from someone who had just found something essential and was about to lose it. She ran after the woman, grabbed the sleeve of her worn blouse, and refused to let go. The paper bird fell to the ground. Sophia didn't care. She hugged the woman's leg tightly as if she were clinging to a piece of driftwood in a shipwreck. And then, for the first time in so many months of absolute silence, Sophia made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was a high-pitched, desperate moan that came from the back of her throat, carrying all the accumulated anguish of 2 years. It was the sound of someone who had finally found an exit door, but feared it would close before she could get through. Patricia ran to them, her heart racing. Edward stood frozen a few feet away, not knowing what to do. The woman stopped, set her cart aside, and knelt down again. She didn't try to push Sophia away, didn't show impatience or annoyance. She just stroked the girl's hair and said in a voice that was pure serenity, "It's okay, little one, it's okay. I'm not going to disappear. I promise I won't disappear." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. She started to apologize, saying her daughter didn't usually behave like this, that she was going through a difficult time, that they didn't want to bother her. But the woman raised a hand, cutting off the apologies. She looked into Patricia's eyes and said something that sounded like absolute truth. "This girl isn't bothering me. This girl is calling me. And when a child calls, you answer." Sophia calmed down a little, but she didn't let go of the woman. She stayed there, clinging to her, as if afraid that a single moment of distraction would make this woman vanish like smoke. The woman then introduced herself. She said her name was Celeste, that she lived nearby, that she worked collecting recyclables, and that she knew this park like the back of her hand. She spoke with a simplicity that disarmed any social barrier. She didn't seem intimidated by Patricia's expensive clothes, Edward's watch, or the aura of wealth that family carried. She treated everyone as equals, because deep down to her they were. Edward finally approached. He tried to explain about Sophia's silence, about the treatments, about how his daughter's reaction was extraordinary. Celeste listened attentively, but when he finished, she said something that took the couple by surprise. "Sometimes children know things we don't. They feel things we can't see. And when a child chooses someone like that, out of the blue, it's because she recognized something. Maybe she recognized in me what she was looking for." They talked for a few more minutes right there, standing in the middle of the park, with Sophia flatly refusing to move away from Celeste. The woman said she came to the park every day, that it was her work route, that she knew almost everyone there. She said they could come back whenever they wanted, that she was always around. And when she finally had to leave for real, because she had to deliver the materials she had collected, she knelt down one more time, looked into Sophia's eyes and said, "I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. I'll wait for you here, you can come." And she did something beautiful. She picked up the paper bird that had fallen, brushed the dirt off it, and carefully placed it in Sophia's hand. "For you to keep until tomorrow, it will remind you that I'll be back." Sophia held the bird as if it were a treasure, and when Celeste finally walked away with her cart, the girl didn't panic again. She stood still, watching the woman get farther away, clutching the origami to her chest. And then, in a gesture that made time stop for Edward and Patricia, Sophia raised her hand and waved. It was a small, shy wave, but it was there. It was communication. It was connection. It was life returning. On the way home, Sophia didn't let go of the bird for a second in the car. She looked at it from every angle, ran her fingers over the paper folds, brought it close to her face as if she could smell the person who had made it. Patricia and Edward exchanged glances in the rearview mirror, both thinking the same thing, but not daring to say it out loud. In a few hours, a stranger pushing a recycling cart had achieved something the best specialists in the country hadn't managed in almost 2 years. She had made Sophia react. She had made Sophia feel. She had made Sophia want to communicate. That night, Sophia didn't go straight to her room after dinner as she usually did. She took paper and colored pencils and sat at the living room table. And she drew. But she didn't draw the usual little house. She drew a woman with white hair next to a cart. She drew herself, small next to the woman, and she drew a huge heart between them. Patricia looked at the drawing and felt something break inside her chest. It was pain and relief at the same time. Pain because she realized she might have spent 2 years trying to give her daughter everything, except what she really needed, and relief because now finally she had a clue how to reach Sophia. Edward called Dr. Miller that same night and told her everything that had happened. Helen listened in silence, and at the end simply said, "I knew it. When she pointed outside that wall, I knew that's what she was looking for. someone real, someone who wasn't afraid to be simple, someone who wouldn't try to fix her, just accept her. And you found that person. On Sunday, they returned to the park even before the agreed-upon time. Edward had cancelled an important meeting. Patricia had cancelled a charity luncheon. Nothing else mattered but being there when Celeste arrived. Sophia was agitated in a way they had never seen. She paced back and forth, constantly looking in the direction where the woman had appeared the day before, holding the paper bird like a lucky charm. And when they finally saw Celeste arriving with her cart, Sophia took off. She ran with such speed that Edward could barely keep up, and she threw herself into the woman's arms as if she were coming home after a long journey. Celeste received her with the same serenity as always. She hugged Sophia, kissed the top of her head and said, "I told you I'd be back. Celeste always keeps her promises." And then she did something unexpected. She took another origami out of her pocket, this time a kitten. She said she had spent the night making it, thinking about the little girl who had held her leg so tightly, that she felt she needed to come back with a new gift. Sophia took the kitten and looked at Celeste with shining eyes. It wasn't just joy. It was deep recognition, as if her soul were, saying, "It's you. It was you I was waiting for." They stayed together for almost 2 hours. Celeste was in no hurry to work that day. It was Sunday, and she said Sunday was a day for rest and for being with the people you love. She told Sophia stories, simple stories about the park animals, about the trees, about the people she knew. She spoke with theatrical gestures, changing her voice for each character, making Sophia react in ways neither Edward nor Patricia had imagined possible. The girl smiled, genuinely smiled, and at one point when Celeste imitated the sound of a bird, Sophia tried to imitate it too. The sound that came out was imperfect, strange, but it was there. It was an attempt at vocal communication. It was a miracle disguised as a game. When it was time for Celeste to leave again, she explained to Sophia that she had to go home, that she lived far away and had a long walk. Sophia was visibly sad, but she didn't panic like the day before. Something in her was already understanding that Celeste wasn't going to disappear forever, that there was a rhythm, a routine, an implicit commitment between them. But still, when the woman started to walk away, Sophia ran after her one more time and, holding that calloused hand, tried to say something. Her lips moved, her throat strained, but the words still wouldn't come. Celeste knelt down, as she always did, getting right at Sophia's eye level, and said with all the patience in the world, "No need to rush, sweetie. The words will come when they're ready. And until they do, I understand everything you're telling me without speaking. Your eyes speak, your smile speaks, your hug speaks. You're already talking to me, just in a different way." And she kissed Sophia's forehead before leaving. Patricia was an emotional wreck. She realized in that moment that she had spent 2 years thinking Sophia needed specialists, expensive treatments, scientific methods, and maybe what her daughter really needed was someone like Celeste, who didn't have a diploma hanging on the wall, but had something much more valuable. She had time, she had patience, and she had that rare ability to look at a child and see a whole person, not a problem to be solved. When they got home, Patricia went straight to her room, locked the door and cried. She cried out everything she had held in for 2 years. She cried with relief, with guilt, with hope, with fear. Edward stood outside the door, not knowing what to say, because he was feeling all of it too. In the following days, their routine changed completely. Every afternoon, without fail, they went to the park to look for Celeste. Sometimes she was there, sometimes not. When she was, Sophia would spend hours by her side, watching as the woman collected recyclables, helping in her own way, picking up small bottles and placing them carefully, in the cart, as if it were the most important thing in the world. When Celeste wasn't there, Sophia would be sad, but she no longer panicked. She waited. She held her paper origami and waited for their next meeting. It was on one of those afternoons when they were looking for Celeste and couldn't find her, that a florist who worked nearby noticed them. She saw Sophia clearly looking for someone, saw the girl's anxiety, and approached. She asked if they were looking for Celeste. Patricia confirmed, and the florist smiled warmly. She said she had known Celeste for Years. That she was a beloved figure in the area. That she wasn't just a can collector, she was so much more. The florist explained that Celeste was like a grandmother to the whole neighborhood, that she took in children who had nowhere to go, helped mothers who had no one to watch their kids while they worked, tutored those who needed help with homework, brought school supplies to families who couldn't afford them, told stories in squares and playgrounds, and was a constant presence in the lives of dozens of poor children in that part of New York. She didn't do it for money because she wasn't paid. She did it because she loved it, because she understood children, because she had a natural gift for being with them. And then the florist told them something that made Patricia feel the ground disappear from under her feet. Celeste had had a daughter many years ago, a beautiful, vibrant girl who had been the light of her life. But the girl had gotten sick as a child, a serious illness, one of those that medicine can't always beat. And Celeste had lost her daughter at the age of 6. She had been devastated, shattered, unable to move on, until one day she realized that the love she felt for her daughter hadn't died. It was still inside her, whole, needing somewhere to go, and she began to dedicate that love to other children. Every child who crossed her path received a piece of the love that Celeste couldn't give her own daughter until the end. That revelation changed everything. Suddenly, it was clear why the connection between Sophia and Celeste had been so immediate, so profound. It wasn't just empathy, it wasn't just kindness, it was mutual recognition. Sophia, who lived in silence, looking for someone who could understand her without demands, without pressure, without impossible expectations. And Celeste, who had a daughter-shaped hole in her heart, and who saw in every child a chance to keep alive the love she couldn't fully give. They had found each other because they needed each other. It was as simple and as deep as that. Edward and Patricia began to search for Celeste with even more determination. They asked several people in the park, left messages with the florist, with the popcorn vendor, with anyone who knew her, and they finally found out that Celeste used to go on Saturday mornings to a small square on the other side of the city, near where she lived. A simple square, with no elaborate playground, just a few benches and a large tree. That's where she would gather a group of neighborhood kids and tell stories. The following Saturday they went there. They drove for over an hour across New York, leaving their affluent neighborhood and entering a humble one, with simple houses, streets without perfect pavement, small shops, working-class people. Patricia felt out of place in that environment, not because she was judging, but because she realized how far removed she lived from that reality, how she had created a bubble around her family that isolated them not only from dangers, but also from the real, pulsating, imperfect, and beautiful life happening on the streets of their own city. When they arrived at the square, the scene they saw was breathtaking. Celeste was sitting under the large tree, surrounded by at least 10 children of various ages. Some had mended clothes, others were barefoot, but they were all looking at her with total attention. She was telling a story about a butterfly who didn't know how to fly and was helped by a caterpillar. She made different voices, used broad gestures, changed her facial expression for each character. The children laughed, asked questions, interacted. It was a lesson in humanity disguised as storytelling. Sophia saw Celeste from a distance, and her whole face lit up. She let go of Patricia's hand and ran. She ran with all the strength in her little legs, ran as if her life depended on it. And when she reached Celeste, she threw herself into her arms with such intensity, it almost knocked them over. Celeste hugged her, surprised and happy, and said, "Look who's here, my special little friend." The other children looked on curiously. Some came closer, touched Sophia, asked her name, and Celeste, with that simple wisdom that only comes from life experience, made the introductions. She said that Sophia was learning to talk, that she spoke in a different way for now, but that she was very smart and very affectionate. If you were in Sophia's parents' shoes, would you have trusted such a simple, unknown person to help your child, or would you have preferred to stick with the specialists? Let us know in the comments. And it was there, surrounded by barefoot children in a square without expensive toys, hugged by a woman who smelled of laundry soap and sunshine, that Sophia finally said her first clear word in almost 2 years. She looked at Celeste, held her face with her two little hands and said, with a clarity that made time stop, "Grandma." It wasn't confusion. It wasn't a mistake. Sophia knew exactly what she was saying. She wasn't calling Celeste Grandma because she was confused. She was calling her that because she recognized her, because she felt it, because that word carried everything she wanted to express: trust, love, belonging. Celeste froze for a second, her eyes filled with tears, and then she hugged Sophia tightly and whispered in her ear, "Grandma's here, my beautiful girl. Grandma's here, and she's not going anywhere." Patricia and Edward watched from a distance, unable to move. Edward felt a strange mix of joy and pain in his chest. Joy because his daughter had spoken, because she had come back. Pain because he realized her first word after so long wasn't mommy or daddy, it was grandma, for a woman she had known, for only a short time, but who somehow had managed to reach her heart in a way they hadn't in 5 years. That hurt, but it also taught him something. One of the children in the group, a girl of about 7 with a ponytail and a smile too wide for her small face, approached Sophia and offered her hand. She said her name was Julia and asked if Sophia wanted to play tag. And Sophia, looking at Julia with those eyes that were still learning to communicate, said another word. Yes. 2 words in a row. Grandma and yes and ma. After 2 years of absolute silence, Sophia had just produced 2 complete, clear, intentional words. They weren't random words. They were choices. They were declarations. And Celeste understood before anyone else. She looked at Patricia and Edward with tears streaming down her face and said with a quiet certainty, she wasn't sick, she was waiting. Waiting to feel safe. Waiting to find real people. Waiting for unconditional love. And now, she's found it. The children ran around the square and Sophia joined them. She stumbled, fell, got up laughing. She got her expensive clothes dirty. She tore her sleeve a little running past a bush. And she was radiant. It was the first time Edward and Patricia had seen their daughter truly play. Not that solitary, silent play in the perfect mansion garden. This was real play, with noise, with laughter, with sweat, with life. Sophia was finally being a child. In the days that followed, Sophia spoke more. They weren't long sentences or complex conversations, but they were real, intentional words full of meaning. She said yes and no to express agreement or refusal. She said water when she was thirsty. She said grandma whenever she saw Celeste or Mr. And slowly she began to try other words too. Pretty when she saw a flower. Want when she desired something. Thank you when she received something. It was as if each word were an achievement, a step she climbed with effort, but also with joy. Dr. Miller followed everything with clinical attention, but also with genuine emotion. She told Edward and Patricia that what was happening with Sophia wasn't just language development. It was emotional reconstruction. The girl hadn't spoken for 2 years because she didn't feel safe to express herself, because she lived in an environment where, despite all her parents' love, something essential was missing. Imperfection, raw humanity, the risk and beauty of a genuine encounter with another person. And Celeste had brought all of that. She wasn't perfect. She had no scientific method. She promised no results. She just loved. And sometimes, Helen said, love without technique works better than technique without love. Edward was undergoing a silent but profound transformation. He, who had built an empire based on control, efficiency, and measurable results, was learning that the most important things in life don't follow spreadsheets or adhere to schedules. Sophia hadn't started talking again because they had followed the right protocol. She had started talking again because she had found true affection in a dirt-floored square, in the arms of a woman who made a living from recycling. That shook all the certainties Edward had about the world, and he began, for the first time in a long time, to question not only how he was raising his daughter, but how he was living his own life. Patricia, for her part, felt a mixture of immense gratitude and corrosive guilt. She was grateful to Celeste in a way she couldn't express in words. At the same time, she felt guilty for taking so long to realize that the problem wasn't with Sophia, but with the way the family lived. She spent sleepless nights replaying the last few years, remembering all the times she had put safety above freedom, protection above experience, luxury above simplicity. And she realized she had built a gilded cage not only for Sophia, but for herself as well. They had both lived locked up, each in her own way. It was Patricia who suggested the invitation. She told Edward that it would be important for Celeste to see the house where Sophia lived, that it would be a way to bring together the two worlds the girl now inhabited. Edward hesitated, not because he didn't want Celeste there, but because he was afraid of the reaction of the staff, the neighbors, the people in their social circle. He knew many people would judge. But he looked at Sophia, who at that moment was drawing another paper bird, copying Celeste's origami, and realized that caring about others' judgment had cost him too much. It had cost him 2 years of his own daughter's voice, so he agreed. The invitation was extended. On a Saturday in the square where Celeste gathered the children, Patricia approached her carefully, almost with reverence, and said they would love for her to see their home, to have lunch with them, to spend a different kind of afternoon. Celeste was surprised. She looked at Patricia with those eyes that had seen everything and said with disarming honesty, "I don't know if I'll know how to act in a rich person's house. I'm a simple person, used to cement floors and a pot on the stove. I don't want to embarrass you." Patricia's heart ached. She held Celeste's calloused hands and said something that came from the bottom of her soul. "You taught us how to listen to our daughter. You taught us that simplicity is worth more than luxury. You taught us that love doesn't need expensive packaging. If anyone should be embarrassed here, it's us for taking so long to learn that. Please accept. Sophia needs you to be present in every part of her life, and we need you too." Celeste accepted, and the following Sunday at 3 in the afternoon, she arrived at the Upper East Side mansion. She didn't arrive by taxi or Uber. She came on foot, having taken 2 buses and walked the rest of the way. When she rang the intercom at the high gate of that house that looked more like a small palace, she almost gave up. She almost turned back, feeling she didn't belong in that world. But then she thought of Sophia, of those little eyes that had shone so brightly when they first saw her, and she took a deep breath. She was doing this for the girl. Only for the girl. The security guard at the gate looked her up and down with suspicion. Simple clothes, flip-flops, and old bag. He asked in a tone that made it clear he thought this was a mistake, if she was sure she was at the right place. Celeste said the family's name in a firm voice. The guard checked the list of expected visitors, found her name with visible surprise on his face, and reluctantly opened the gate. Celeste walked up the cobblestone path flanked by impeccable gardens, looking at everything with an expression that mixed admiration and sadness. Admiration for the beauty, sadness imagining a child growing up in that enormous empty space. Sophia saw Celeste from the window and shot off. She ran through the house shouting, "Grandma, Grandma, Grandma." It was the first time Edward and Patricia had heard their daughter shout, the first time they heard real excitement in her voice. Sophia opened the door before Celeste even reached it, and threw herself into the woman's arms with such force it almost knocked her over. Celeste picked her up, spun her around, kissed her face several times. And there, at the entrance of that multi-million-dollar mansion, what truly had value was happening. Pure, uncomplicated, unulterior love. Patricia greeted Celeste with a genuine hug. Edward shook her hand with respect, almost with solemn gratitude. They invited her in to see the house, and that's when the problems started. The housekeeper, Martha, a middle-aged woman who had worked there for 15 years and had very rigid ideas about social hierarchy, looked at Celeste with a mixture of shock and poorly disguised disapproval. She didn't say anything openly, but her eyes spoke volumes. It was that look that judges, that measures, that puts people in boxes and decides who deserves to be where. Martha made a point of following Celeste through the house, as if she were watching to make sure nothing was touched or taken. She would adjust objects the visitor hadn't even come near, sigh loudly when Celeste admired a piece of decor, and make subtle comments about how certain rooms were too delicate for certain people. Patricia noticed and felt angry, but it was Sophia who truly reacted. when Celeste went to sit on the living room sofa, and Martha, with a venomously false politeness, suggested that perhaps it would be better to sit on the porch chairs because the sofa was imported, and very light-colored, Sophia placed herself between the housekeeper and Celeste. The girl who had spent 2 years without saying a word, who had never stood up for herself or defended anyone, spread her arms wide like a shield and said, in a firm, clear voice, "No. Grandma good." The silence that followed was tense and revealing. Martha turned red, a mix of embarrassment and indignation. Edward stared at the housekeeper with a coldness she had never seen before, and said, in a tone that allowed no argument, "Celeste is a guest of this family. She will sit where she wants, eat what she wants, and will be treated with the same respect that any person deserves in this house. If that's a problem for anyone, that person can leave." Martha muttered an unconvincing apology and left the room. Celeste felt awkward about the situation, tried to smooth things over by saying she didn't mind, that she could sit anywhere. But Patricia took her by the hand, led her to the sofa and said, "You're going to sit here because this is where we sit with the people we love, and we love you. Sophia loves you. And if someone doesn't understand that, the problem isn't with you." Lunch was served in the dining room, at that enormous table that was usually empty. The food was excellent, prepared by the house cook. But Celeste barely touched her food. She wasn't used to all that formality, with so many utensils, so many plates, so much at once. Sophia noticed Celeste was uncomfortable and did something that melted everyone's heart. She took her plate, put a little rice and beans on it, and offered it with her own hands, saying, "Eat, Grandma. Yummy." Celeste looked at that simple gesture and was moved. It wasn't about the food. It was about being seen, being cared for, being loved by a child she had also learned to love. After lunch, Sophia wanted to show Celeste her room. She climbed the stairs, pulling the woman by the hand, eager to share her space. When Celeste entered that room, which was larger than the entire house where she lived, she was speechless. Toys of every kind, many still in their boxes, never opened. A huge canopy bed, shelves full of books, a computer, a television, everything money could buy. And in the middle of it all, on a simple little table near the window, were the paper origami that Celeste had given Sophia, the bird, the kitten, and a few others she had made in subsequent meetings. They were lined up carefully, as if they were the most precious things in the entire room. Celeste approached those old, folded pieces of paper, touched them gently, and then looked at Sophia and asked, "Of everything you have here, are these old scraps of paper your favorites?" Sophia nodded vigorously and said, "Yes, because Grandma made them, because they have love." And then she picked up the most expensive doll she had, an imported doll that cost the equivalent of months of work for many people, and offered it to Celeste. "Here, Grandma, for you." Celeste gently refused. She said she couldn't accept it, that it was too expensive, that Sophia should keep it for herself. But the girl insisted, pushing the doll into the woman's arms. And Celeste, seeing the genuine insistence of this child, understood that it wasn't about the object. It was about the gesture. Sophia was doing with her what she had done with Sophia, offering something made of affection, not price. But still, Celeste didn't accept the doll. Instead, she knelt down to Sophia's level and said, "You know what I want for a present? A hug, a really big hug, because a hug is a gift that never ends. We can give and receive them every day, and they never go away." Sophia hugged Celeste with all her might. And it was there, in that embrace in the middle of a room full of luxury but empty of true affection for so long, that Sophia whispered in the woman's ear the words she hadn't yet said to anyone, "I love you, Grandma." Celeste closed her eyes, held the little girl against her chest and cried. She cried for the daughter she had lost. She cried for Sophia, whom she had found. She cried for the strange beauty of life, which takes with one hand and gives back with the other, never in the way we expect, but always in the way we need. When they came downstairs, Edward was in the living room with a heavy expression. He called Patricia and Celeste over to talk. He said he needed to understand some things, that he had questions that wouldn't leave his mind. He asked Celeste how she knew so much, about children, how she managed to connect so deeply with them, where all that patience, all that wisdom came from. And Celeste, after a long silence, told her story. She had had a daughter named Lucy, a beautiful, cheerful girl full of life, but Lucy had gotten very sick at the age of 4, a serious illness that required long and painful treatment. Celeste had done everything she could, sold everything she had, worked 3 jobs at once to pay for the medicine and doctors. But it wasn't enough. Lucy had passed away shortly before her 7th birthday, and Celeste had been destroyed. She stopped eating, stopped leaving the house, stopped truly living. She stayed like that for almost a year, just breathing because her body breathed on its own, but with no will to go on. Until one day, sitting on a park bench for no particular reason, she saw a little girl crying because she had fallen and scraped her knee. The girl's mother wasn't around, and Celeste, in an impulse that came from some deep place she didn't even know still existed, got up, went to the child, cleaned the scrape, blew on the knee saying it would make the pain go away, and stayed there until the girl stopped crying. When the mother arrived running, she thanked her and left with her daughter. And Celeste realized something. For the first time since Lucy had passed, she had felt something other than pain. She had felt purpose. That's when she started taking care of other children. Not formally, not as a job, just as a personal mission. She noticed children who needed attention, affection, someone to stop and listen to them. And she would stop, she would talk, play, teach, and every time she did, she felt that the love she had given Lucy hadn't died with her. It was there, alive, needing a place to go. So Celeste transformed her pain into care. She transformed loss into presence. And that's how she survived. That's how she carried on. When Celeste finished her story, there were tears in everyone's eyes. Sophia had come closer during the story and was hugging the woman's leg. And when Celeste finished speaking, Sophia asked with that disarming innocence only children have, "Grandma sad?" Celeste stroked her hair and replied, "I used to be very sad, but not anymore, because you came into my life, you and so many other children. You taught me that love doesn't die, it just changes shape." That night, after Celeste had gone home, Sophia did something she had never done before. She went to her parents' room, walked in without knocking, climbed onto the bed where they were lying, trying to process everything that had happened that day, and lay down between them. And then, in a clear voice she was still learning to use, she said, "Mommy, Daddy, I love you." It wasn't manipulation. It wasn't an attempt to compensate for calling Celeste Grandma first. It was pure truth. Sophia was saying that now, after finding Celeste, after learning it was safe to open up, she could express the love she had always felt but didn't know how to show. Edward hugged his daughter and cried. For the first time in front of her, he let the tears fall without trying to hold them back, and he said something that needed to be said a long time ago. "I'm sorry, Sophia. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you needed. I'm sorry I tried to buy your happiness instead of building with you." Patricia cried too, also apologized, and also promised things would be different from now on. And they were different. The days that followed brought profound changes. Edward started leaving work earlier to be home for dinner. Patricia cancelled meaningless social commitments and started spending entire afternoons with Sophia, not just supervising, but truly playing, talking, living. And Sophia, every day, spoke more. It wasn't just her vocabulary that was growing. It was her confidence, her desire to communicate, her joy in being understood. It was Sophia who made the unusual request as her 6th birthday approached. Patricia asked what kind of party she wanted, expecting to hear about some princess theme or cartoon character, but Sophia said something no one expected. "I want a party at Grandma Celeste's house, with the kids from the square. I want a simple cake and real games. I don't want a hired clown or expensive decorations. I want a real party, not something out of a magazine." Edward and Patricia looked at each other. This was completely contrary to everything they had planned to do when their daughter was finally able to celebrate a real birthday. But they looked at Sophia, saw the certainty on her face, and agreed. Celeste was surprised by the request, tried to say her house was too small, too simple. But Sophia insisted. She said that's where she wanted to be, that's where she would be happy. And Celeste, unable to resist those pleading eyes, accepted. Sophia's birthday party took place on a sunny Saturday in November. Celeste's house was on a narrow street in a working-class neighborhood in the Bronx, a world away from the Upper East Side where the family lived. It was a small, simple house with 2 tiny bedrooms, a living room. That also served as a kitchen and a small dirt-floored backyard with a hose in the corner. There was no pool, no elaborate garden, none of what Sophia was used to. But when the girl got out of the car and saw that house, her face lit up as if she had arrived at the most magical place in the world. The kids from the square were already there. Julia, the girl with the ponytail who had been the first to invite Sophia to play, had helped Celeste hang colorful paper banners in the yard. Other children had brought drawings they had made especially for Sophia. The decorations were all made from recycled materials. Painted plastic bottles became vases. Pieces of cardboard became posters with affectionate messages written in marker. Bottle caps became plastic flowers. It was simple, it was creative, it was made with hands and hearts. It was everything a party should be. The cake was chocolate, made by one of Celeste's neighbors who had a blessed hand for baking. It didn't have 3 tiers or elaborate fondant. It was round, simple, covered with chocolate frosting and rainbow sprinkles. But when they lit the 6 candles, and everyone sang happy birthday to Sophia, off-key and joyful, the girl cried with happiness. She cried because for the first time in her life, she was having a real party, surrounded by real people, receiving real love. It wasn't a spectacle. It was a celebration. Patricia and Edward were completely out of their comfort zone. They had arrived in an expensive SUV on a street where the cars were old and bicycles were often the only mode of transport. The neighbors looked on with curiosity, some with suspicion. But Celeste introduced everyone naturally. This is Rose. She makes the best cake. In the neighborhood. This is Anthony. He fixes bikes and always helps the kids. This is Jessica, a mother of 3, who works as a housekeeper and still finds time to teach crochet at the church. Each person had a story, a struggle, a dignity that didn't need an important last name or a hefty bank account to exist. Sophia received simple and perfect gifts. Julia had made a bead bracelet with Sophia's favorite colors. Another boy had drawn a portrait of her and Celeste together. One of the mothers had sewn a little rag doll. They were gifts that cost almost nothing in money, but were worth everything in affection. And Sophia received them like treasures, thanking each one, hugging each child, carefully putting everything in a bag Celeste had given her. But the most striking moment of the party came at cake time. Everyone gathered in the small yard, squeezed together but happy, singing to Sophia. And when the song ended and Sophia blew out the candles, she didn't make a silent wish, as is tradition. She said out loud, for everyone to hear, "I wish to never be without you guys again, to always have friends and love, and for all children to be as happy as I am right now." After they ate cake and played for hours, Sophia did something that left Edward and Patricia completely stunned. She went to the car, where they had left a suitcase Sophia had insisted on bringing, and came back dragging the heavy case across the yard. She opened it in front of everyone and started taking out toys. They were expensive, imported toys, some still in the box, and Sophia started handing them out. A remote control car for a boy who had never had an electronic toy. Porcelain doll for Julia. A building block set for another boy. A giant teddy bear for a little girl who hugged it as if she had found a friend. Patricia tried to intervene, more out of reflex than real disagreement. She said Sophia didn't have to give everything away, that she could donate some but keep others. But Sophia looked at her mother with a seriousness surprising for a 6-year-old and said, "I have too much. They have too little. I have friends now. I have love. That's better than toys." And she continued handing them out until the suitcase was empty. The children's mothers were emotional and didn't know how to react. They tried to refuse, saying it was too much that they couldn't accept. But Sophia insisted, placing the toys in the children's hands with a sweet but unmovable determination. And Celeste, watching this, said something that resonated deeply with everyone. Let the children learn to share. Let them learn that happiness grows when it's shared. Sophia is teaching a lesson that many grown-ups still haven't learned. Edward stood there watching his daughter give away toys he had bought, thinking they were the solution to everything, and realized that Sophia had just taught him the greatest lesson of his life. Money can buy things, but only love can buy happiness. And you can't buy love with money. Love is built with presence, with time, with listening, with true giving. It had taken him 6 years and nearly losing his daughter to understand that. That night on the way home, Sophia talked non-stop. She told them about every game, every friend, every special moment of the party. And then she said something that would change the family's course forever. "Daddy, we have a lot of money, right?" Edward confirmed, not understanding where this was going. Sophia continued, "So we can help more people like Grandma helps. We can make more kids happy. Because money by itself is sad. Money that helps is happy." Edward and Patricia sat in silence in the car, processing the depth of those words from a 6-year-old. And it was there, on that hour-long drive across New York, that Edward made a decision that would change everything. He was going to start a foundation, not as a front or for a tax break like so many businessmen did, but as a real commitment, as a way to transform wealth into true impact. And he would do it in partnership with Celeste, because she understood people in a way no expert could. The following months were a time of planning and transformation. Edward spoke at length with Celeste, listened to her ideas, her experiences, her observations about what the neighborhood children really needed. Celeste, initially shy and thinking she had nothing to contribute, began to realize that her street smarts, her knowledge of the families, her sensitivity to invisible needs were worth as much as any university degree. Dr. Miller was brought in to structure methodologies. Dr. Taylor, the renowned doctor who had first suggested Sophia needed a different approach, offered to coordinate free medical evaluations. Patricia took over the administrative side, discovering organizational talents she never knew she had. And Sophia, of course, was the inspiration for it all, the little girl who had lived in silence and now never stopped talking, spreading love wherever she went. The project was named the Celeste House, an obvious tribute to the woman who had been the catalyst for all this transformation. The goal was to create a space where children with communication difficulties, regardless of the cause, could be welcomed without judgment, where traditional and alternative methods could work together, where art, music, nature, and affection were as important as speech therapy and psychology, and most importantly, where each child was seen as a whole person, not a problem to be solved. But not everything was easy. Edward and Patricia's social circle reacted with suspicion and criticism. Friends they considered close began to distance themselves, making snide remarks about how they had lost their minds, how they were mixing with the wrong kind of people, how Sophia was being exposed to dangerous environments. One of Patricia's friends even said at a party that she was using her daughter to feel good about herself, that it was all just unresolved guilt disguised as charity. Patricia came home from that party crying with anger and frustration. But Sophia, who had overheard her mother's conversation with her father, climbed into her lap and said something simple and profound. "Mommy, mean people say mean things. Good people do good things. We're doing good things. Let them talk." Those words from a 6-year-old were like a punch of clarity. Patricia realized she had spent years worrying about the opinions of people who, in the end, didn't really matter. That their judgment was worth zero compared to the real transformation happening in her life, her daughter's life, and the lives of so many other children. The Celeste House opened on a plot of land Edward bought in the same neighborhood where Celeste lived. It wasn't a pompous building. It was a large, airy space with colorful rooms, a big garden, a library, a music room, an art studio, and a community kitchen. The walls were decorated with the children's own drawings. There was no unnecessary luxury, but it had everything essential: space, light, affection, and committed professionals. The opening gathered a large crowd: families from the neighborhood, healthcare professionals, some local politicians, the press. But the most memorable moment was when Sophia went up to the small makeshift stage to speak. She was 6 and a half, holding the same paper bird Celeste had given her that first day in the park, and she said, "I was a girl who didn't talk. Not because I couldn't, but because I was scared. Scared of not being understood. Scared of not being truly loved. Until I found my grandma of the heart, Celeste, who taught me that love doesn't need words. And when I learned that, the words came on their own. This house is for other children to learn what I learned. That everyone deserves to be heard. That everyone deserves love. And that sometimes you have to leave the golden prison to find the real treasure." The audience was completely silent. Some were openly crying. And when Sophia finished speaking and Celeste went on stage to hug her, the ovation was long and sincere. It wasn't the polite applause of a social event. It was genuine recognition that what was happening there was real transformation, not publicity. Dr. Taylor, who had followed the entire journey from the beginning, asked to document Sophia's case for academic purposes. He wanted other professionals to learn from this story, to understand that the solution doesn't always come from rigid protocols, that sometimes the cure is in the obvious thing we insist on complicating, being present, truly listening, loving unconditionally. The recording of Sophia's testimony, made with careful authorization and supervision, went viral when it was shared on social media and scientific outreach channels. But it didn't go viral as a curiosity or entertainment. It went viral because it touched a collective wound. How many children are in emotional silence because they live in environments where everything is controlled, scheduled, too perfect to be real? How many families confuse love with material provision? How many people are trapped in gilded cages waiting for someone to open the door? Sophia gave interviews, always with Celeste by her side, because she had made it a condition. "I only talk if my grandma is with me." And in the interviews, she said things that disarmed adults accustomed to complicating everything. She said she started talking again when she found someone who wasn't in a hurry to listen, that she found joy when she stopped getting things and started getting presents, that she discovered that family isn't just who shares your blood, but who shares your heart. Celeste, uncomfortable in the spotlight, always deflected the credit. She said she hadn't done anything special, that she had just loved a child who needed to be loved. But Sophia, with that disarming honesty, would insist, "You taught me to speak without pressure. You let me be me. And that's everything." The most impactful revelation came during one of these recorded conversations. The interviewer asked about the repetitive drawings Sophia used to make before meeting Celeste, the little house with the figure next to it and the gate. Sophia looked at the old drawings they had kept and said something that gave everyone present goosebumps. "That was Grandma Celeste. I saw her in my head before I met her. I saw her house. I saw her waiting for me. I can't explain it, but I knew there was someone like that in the world. I was just waiting to find her." Dr. Taylor, from a scientific standpoint, called it extraordinary. Dr. Miller called it a deep, human connection. Celeste called it one of life's beautiful mysteries. Edward and Patricia called it an everyday miracle. Everyone interpreted it in their own way, but they all agreed. There was something in this story that went beyond rational explanations. It was about souls recognizing each other, about love finding a way even when everything seemed impossible. The years passed. The Celeste House became a benchmark in New York, serving hundreds of children. Sophia grew up without losing the simplicity she had learned from Celeste. She went to conferences, events, universities, speaking about her story. But she always returned to the little square in the Bronx, where she would sit on the ground with the children and play, draw, listen. She had learned that changing the world starts with changing one heart at a time. Edward completely changed his way of life. He remained a successful businessman, but he learned to measure success differently. Success was no longer just the size of his net worth. It was how many lives he had positively impacted. It was coming home and having real time for his family. It was looking at his daughter and knowing she was truly happy, not just entertained by expensive things. Patricia became a discreet but effective activist for social causes. She used her contacts, her position, her eloquence to open doors, raise funds, and give visibility to projects that made a real difference. And always with Celeste by her side, because she had learned that authentic connection between different worlds is more powerful than any social marketing strategy. Celeste remained Celeste. She lived in the same simple house, although Edward and Patricia had offered 1,000 times to move her to a more comfortable place. She always refused, saying her house held memories that no comfort could replace. But she did accept some practical help. They fixed the roof, replaced the old furniture, and made sure she had everything she needed. And Celeste accepted with gratitude, but without being dazzled. She knew those things didn't define her. What defined her was the love she spread wherever she went. Sophia kept growing. At 10, she was already speaking fluently about emotions, about communication, about the importance of safe environments for children. She didn't lose the voice she had regained. On the contrary, she became a voice for the voiceless. And she always carried with her the paper origami Celeste had made on that first day in the park. They were faded, creased, mended several times, but they remained her most precious treasures. Once, in an interview, Sophia was asked if she thought her story was about overcoming adversity. She thought for a moment, with that seriousness she had carried since she was little, and replied, "It's not about overcoming. It's about finding. I didn't overcome anything. I found what I was looking for. I found true love. I found real people. I found my place in the world. And that place wasn't in a mansion surrounded by expensive toys. It was in the arms of a woman who collected cans for a living but had the richest heart I've ever seen." And then Sophia said the phrase that became the motto of the Celeste house, the phrase that summed it all up. You don't need luxury to be happy. You need love. And love has no price, no address, no social class. Love just is. And when you find it, you recognize it. Because deep down, that's what we've all been looking for. The biggest twist in the whole story wasn't that Sophia started talking again. It was that her entire family learned to listen, truly listen, not just with their ears but with their hearts. Edward learned to hear the need hidden behind his daughter's silence. Patricia learned to listen to her own conscience, telling her she had confused protection with isolation. And Sophia learned to listen to her own voice, the one that was there all along, but could only come out when it found the safety to exist. And Celeste learned that the love she had given her lost daughter hadn't died. It had just transformed, multiplied, and found 1,000 new places to live. Every child she hugged carried a piece of that eternal love. And in that, in a strange and beautiful way, her daughter Lucy lived on. Alive in every hug, in every paper origami, in every story told under a tree, in every tear wiped away, in every smile drawn from a child who had forgotten how to smile. In the end, the story of Sophia and Celeste wasn't about wealth and poverty. It was about humanity. It was about remembering that we are all human beings seeking connection, seeking belonging, seeking love, and that sometimes the most unlikely encounters are the most necessary, that sometimes the cure comes from where we least expect it, that sometimes, in the midst of the chaos of a huge and unequal city like New York, two souls find each other and save one another. Sophia was born at the top of the world, but only found happiness when she came down to the ground, and Celeste, who lived on the ground, discovered she had wings when a little child decided to call her grandma. Together, they proved that real transformation doesn't come from the top down or the bottom up. It comes from heart to heart, and that doesn't respect social geography, doesn't obey rules of etiquette, doesn't care how much money anyone has in the bank. It just happens, and when it happens, it's revolutionary. Years later, when Edward was asked what the most important decision of his life had been, everyone expected him to talk about some billion-dollar deal, some strategic acquisition, some brilliant investment. But he answered without hesitation, "It was agreeing to take my daughter to the park. It was letting go of control, it was trusting, and it was looking into the eyes of a woman society scorns and recognizing in her the person who would teach my family the meaning of true love. That was the decision that saved not only my daughter, but me as well. And it all started with an old paper origami offered by calloused hands to a child who had everything and had nothing. A bird folded with care, made from discarded material, that showed that the most valuable things in life can't be bought in any store. They are built with time, with presence, with giving. They are built by loving for real. They are built by being truly human, by taking off the masks, leaving the gilded cages, and allowing yourself to find and be found by who really matters. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Sophia, Celeste, and their whole family has touched your heart deeply. If you were moved by this journey of transformation and true love, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories, and tell us in the comments what struck you most about this narrative. Was it the unexpected encounter in the park, the family's courage to change, Celeste's simple wisdom, or the strength of a child who found her voice through love? Every day we bring you intense stories like this, revealing the deepest and truest side of the human soul, stories that remind us of what truly matters in life. We'll see you in the next episode with another narrative that will touch your heart.